Man, 2019 has already brought with it some absolute gaming disasters. Obviously, the most publicized one is Anthem, and that game from a reception standpoint is being received pretty poorly. I'm personally enjoying it more than most people, but it's easy to see that the reception for that game isn't all too strong. However, one of my more anticipated games of 2019 was set in the Front Mission universe. It was kind of a new IP, but it was set in the Front Mission universe, and of course, that is Left Alive, a game coming from Square Enix, a game with an incredibly talented studio behind it. A game that heading into its release, it wasn't getting a lot of anticipation, but a lot of you guys that did know about it were very excited for it. Hell, I uploaded a video last month going over the games that I would recommend you guys to wait for a sale on this month, and Left Alive was one of those games that I was a little bit skeptical about going in just because it was a new Square Enix title, and Square Enix has been very hit or miss recently. And when dissecting Left Alive and the poor reception to the game, Square Enix just being at the helm of this game is one of those elements we're going to talk about in a little bit, but a lot of you guys commented on that video saying, hey, Left Alive is a game that I'm picking up day one. This game is going to be absolutely worth $60. Look at the team that's working on it. Look at the gameplay we've seen thus far. We don't get quality stealth games. We don't get quality games with mechas in it. And you guys were expecting something really great out of Left Alive. I was hoping for something really great out of Left Alive for a wide variety of different reasons. One, the biggest comparison point for this game was the Metal Gear franchise. And of course, Metal Gear is going to be MIA for a very long time, if not forever. And we could really use a game to help fill that void, and a new franchise like Left Alive, if that developed into something of quality, that would be fantastic. And more than that, Square Enix is a publisher that really needed to get some big games rolling. It has been a lot of fumbles for them. I can go back to Final Fantasy 15, and that's another game that I enjoyed more than most people, but let's be real, that game took 10 years to develop and put out, and it wasn't at the quality level that I think the majority of people expected. Had one of the worst stories in Final Fantasy history, and that game had a bunch of its DLC content canceled. The story with Final Fantasy 15 has been well publicized, so I don't have to go into it that much. However, more recently, late 2018 into this early 2019 period has been pretty freaking bad. You look at Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and again, another game that from a quality standpoint wasn't all too bad. However, I would say it was weaker than the previous title in Rise of the Tomb Raider, and commercially, that game was a disaster, and I think going back to it, it really came down to a promotional standpoint. I said it so many times before the release of Shadow of the Tomb Raider, that game's anticipation and hype was pretty much dead, and I think a big reason for that is Square Enix announced a huge DLC plan for the game even before we saw gameplay of the title. How these publishers don't get from a promotional standpoint that is not the right way to do things. Even if you have this DLC plan in place, why do you announce it and reveal it even before showing off gameplay of the game? I get that they wanted people to pre-order the game and whatnot and pre-order the special edition, but come on, that was so insane to me, and it was 7 pieces of DLC content. And Shadow of the Tomb Raider, of course, from a box office standpoint, didn't do all too well. Then we had another new IP release in The Quiet Man. That game was an absolute disaster, one of the worst received games of 2018. A new IP that had a little bit of anticipation going into it. Sure, it wasn't a big budget game in that it was released for $14.99. It was a smaller experience, but the fact of the matter is that game turned out to be a disaster. Then you go to Just Cause 4, and Just Cause 4 is another one of the worst received games in recent memory. It was a legitimate step back from Just Cause 3, and how a game sequel can do that, actually provide you with a weaker experience, that is beyond me. The one saving grace that Square Enix has had recently was Kingdom Hearts 3, and that game did really well from a critical and commercial standpoint, so good on them. But it's not like that's a franchise that they can keep churning out games. Hell, Kingdom Hearts 3 took a long time to get out, and I doubt that we're going to see another game in the franchise, and I doubt that franchise is going to be super consistent going forward. That's why I was really hoping for Left Alive to break out and become this breakthrough franchise for Square Enix to really rely on, and now we look at the reception of this game, and going back to when I told you guys to wait for a sale on, just on the basis of me being skeptical on a bigger Square Enix game, even though this was more so described as a AA game rather than a AAA game, nonetheless, it was a game that had a reasonable amount of anticipation for it. Again, you had a star-studded studio working on this game, veteran developers, Toshifumi Nabashima, the director of Armored Core, Yoji Shinakawa from Kojima Productions, which made a ton of sense, and Takayuki Yanase, the mech designer of a bunch of iconic franchises, including Ghost in the Shell, Gundam 00, and Xenoblade Chronicles X. And they're joining a talented team of developers, and I thought there was all the potential in the world for Left Alive, and unfortunately, the game just hasn't turned out all too well. Personally speaking, I couldn't even get all too far in the game, just because by Chapter 2, it got so freaking challenging. You guys might say I'm bad at the game, but hey, the difficulty spikes in this game has been well publicized. It's been a big talking point about the game, and there are so many other issues with the game. Let's talk about these visuals that when you actually see the final game in action, a lot of people are bringing up the fact that it harkens back to an early PlayStation 3 or Xbox 360 title, and I know visuals aren't everything, but deep into this console generation, 2019, almost 6 years since the PlayStation 4 has been released, I have a certain standard for visual production, especially out of a game that was released at a full $60 price point. It'd be one thing if this was a budget $39.99 release, then okay, you can get away with some lackluster visuals, but this was promoted as a full price game, and at $60, the visuals were just not acceptable. The gameplay was super lackluster and lacked a lot of depth, and coupled with the overly challenging gameplay, that was a major issue. And even if you don't want to take my word for it, let's take a look at it from an objective standpoint. I know Metacritic isn't the best barometer, but it is something I look at based on a lot of different reviewers and what they felt about the game, and the game currently has a 39 on Metacritic. That is an awful score, only based on 10 review scores, and the highest review score was a 7 out of 10. However, it went as low as 2 out of 10. I think DualShockers had the best review, and they encompassed it pretty well out of 3.5, saying, "I'd stay as far away from Left Alive as possible. For all you hardcore front mission fans hoping for a proper sequel in the series, you can bury those hopes and dreams. With a team consisting of so much talent behind it, I truly wonder what went wrong with Left Alive. I love Square Enix games to death typically, but this is frankly unacceptable, and it's $60. That point should be imperative whenever you talk about this game. The $60 price point standard has just been something I've talked about a lot of times. Not a lot of games are worth $60, and if you release a game at this point, you need to deliver utmost quality, especially in the month of March where you're going up against games that are being received really well, like Devil May Cry 5. It's almost a foregone conclusion that Sekiro Shadows Die Twice is going to be an awesome game, and those are the games you're going to be compared to. Left Alive is just falling very short from that. The only saving grace to Left Alive is that the storytelling is pretty strong, but how are you going to make your way through that story if the gameplay just isn't up to snuff and the game just fumbles in so many other different areas? Also, to use Steam reviews as a barometer if you want a general reception from other gamers, the game currently has a very negative reception. Upon 314 user reviews, only 18% of those reviews were positive. For a bigger budget game, that is one of the worst contrasts I've ever seen, where only 18% of the reviews are positive. Now, this is a game that released on PC. The performance is quite a mess as well, and coupled the fact with the lackluster performance on PC and the game just generally not being all too good, the PC release has fumbled quite a bit as well. And you contrast that to recent games being put out by a publisher like Capcom, another Japanese publisher, and Japanese publishers are often the ones that are bashed for lackluster PC versions. You look at games like Resident Evil 2 and Devil May Cry 5, those games have turned out incredibly well on PC. Of course, those games are filled with much more quality than Left Alive, but even if you assess it from strictly a performance standpoint, those games are a lot stronger. Now, Monster Hunter World did have some issues on PC from the get-go. It was in a much better state than Left Alive. It had some network issues, and that game has come a long way on PC. So again, you compare a Japanese publisher like Capcom and a Japanese publisher like Square Enix, just night and day. And again, from a Square Enix standpoint, Square Enix was one of those publishers that I used to herald as one of the top tier publishers in gaming. I thought they were synonymous with greatness, but for a very long time, that has not been the case. It's been very hit or miss, and dare I say, more recently, it's been missed, especially with some of the major franchises that they've had. They've had a Tomb Raider, they've had Just Cause, they've had compelling new IPs like Left Alive and The Quiet Man. Final Fantasy 15 was just a disaster. I mean, with a 10-year development cycle, I think it was a foregone conclusion that that game was going to be a disaster. The only Square Enix title in recent memory that was a slam dunk success was Kingdom Hearts 3, but one game out of so many that are just fumbles after fumbles after fumbles. Now, there were okay games like World of Final Fantasy, World of Final Fantasy Maxima. Some of their remasters were cool, like Final Fantasy 12 Zodiac Age, but those aren't what's going to break through and make Square Enix be heralded as the big publisher that they used to be. Nobody's going to look at a Final Fantasy 12 remaster or a World of Final Fantasy and think, hey, Square Enix is back. No, they need compelling new IPs. They need to take the franchise they already own and make them even better and strip away the anti-consumer practices. Again, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, it was an okay game in many regards, but from a promotional standpoint, it was so head-scratching. Just Cause 4 is another game, another franchise that has lost so much luster, and I do want to give Square Enix some credit for Tokyo RPG Factory. That's been one of the more consistent studios that they have. They've put out I Am Setsuna as well as Lost Sphear. Not breakthrough JRPGs, but that's a studio with a lot of potential, so I do give them credit for that, but there's a lot lot of issues right now, and I do want to see Square Enix get back on track, but they need compelling new IPs. They need games that resonate at a bigger level, and they just need less flops like Left Alive, like Shadow of the Tomb Raider, like Just Cause 4, and like Quiet Man. Those need to be eliminated altogether. So that's gonna conclude this video. I know the negativity's been a little bit high with our video on EA yesterday and our video on Square Enix now, but this really just needed to be said, and I needed to get this off my chest because this is one of my favorite publishers in gaming. At least they used to be, and I want to see them get back to their glory days, but if we don't call it as we see it, they're not gonna change, and we need them to desperately right now. That's gonna conclude this video. I definitely want to hear from you guys. Do you agree with me? Disagree? What is your overall perception of Square Enix right now? Sound off with all of your thoughts in the comment section down below. Thank you for watching, and goodbye. Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, make sure to hit the subscribe button, and if you're already subscribed, do us a favor and hit the bell icon. This way you'll be notified whenever we post a new video. That's the best way to keep up with all of our uploads, and we usually try to upload 2 videos a day. And with the bell icon hit, you'll be notified whenever we do upload a video. As always, thanks for watching.